All right, I think we can start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I am Almas Naseem from the communications team at ICCT. I welcome everyone to the webinar. Here we are going to discuss the pathways for HDVs in India and how we can move towards net zero with that. Just to begin with, we have some housekeeping rules. Please, you can share the questions in the Q&A box and we will take those questions at the end. The webinar is going to be of 1.5 hours. It's going to be recorded and we'll be sharing the recording clips on our YouTube channel as well as social media. The webinar will be moderated by Amit Bhatt, who's also the Managing Director at ICCT India. So over to you, Amit.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Almas. Hi, good evening and good morning, depending on where you are joining this webinar. We are very excited to have you all join today's webinar. So today, what we will be discussing in this next 90 odd minutes is that we'll be talking about exploring pathways for heavy-duty vehicles in India with the objective of kind of aligning ourselves with the net zero target. So as part of this webinar, we will have three distinct segments. Segment one would be kind of hearing from the two lead authors, in fact, the three lead authors of this research who are with us. Segment B will be also hearing from the three experts, four experts who have joined us. And then we will also be having a little bit of Q&A with the audience. So what we have done for the next 80 odd minutes is that we will kind of also have some really important guests who have joined us. So as you know, this webinar, we have Dr. Hanif Qureshi, the Additional Secretary of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, will be joining us shortly to deliver his keynote. But more than that, he will also share his insights on why this topic is important and what's the current thinking at the Ministry of Heavy Industries on pathways for decarbonizing the heavy-duty vehicle segment. So that is one important aspect that we'll be hearing. We also have our experts who have joined us today. So we have with us Ms. Anumita Rai Chaudhary, who is the Executive Director of Research and Advocacy at the Center of Science and Environment, or CSE, as we know, in New Delhi. We also have Mr. Sunil. He's the CXO at IPL Tech Electric Private Limited, and who has joined us on this webinar as well. We have Mr. I.V. Rao from the Energy and Research Institute, a really stalwart in the field of the automotive segment. He's with us. And then we also have the authors of the report that we'll be discussing. So we have Aviral Yadav, who is the researcher at the International Council on Clean Transport. We also have Dr. Namita Singh, who is the associate researcher at the ICCT. And then we also have Nikita, the program lead at ICCT. So we have a kind of a good variety of mix from the industry as well as from the research community who will be part of today's webinar. So we will start the session, and we will first request Aviral Yadav to take us through the first part of the presentation. And the presentation is bifurcated in two parts. The first on the technological pathways that we'll be discussing, and the second would be around the net zero conversation. So with this few opening points in mind, I will hand it over to Aviral to take the conversation forward. So over to you, Aviral.
Thanks, Amit. I'll be sharing my screen. I hope the presentation is visible in full screen mode. Is it now full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning also to people from outside of India. And welcome to this webinar. My part of the presentation will focus on the different pathways for heavy duty vehicles in India. India's economy rides on the back of heavy duty vehicles like truck, buses, and tractor trailer. These vehicles are just 4% of the overall stock of on-road vehicles, but their emissions impact is huge. They contribute to about 58% of the on-road vehicular emissions. And as the economy grows, our projections show that these emissions can double by 2050. Now, these numbers of projections are incompatible with India's climate ambitions. We have a goal of reducing emission intensity by 45% by 2030, as per our NDCs. We have a goal of energy independence by 2047, and we have also a goal of reaching net zero by 2070. Continuing with diesel powertrains we will not be able to meet these goals. Therefore, there is a need for zero emission pathways, and to understand what are the different technologies and fuel pathways open to us and how much reductions they can give. And that's what we try to understand through this research on a comparison of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. To talk about what is the goal and scope, we found the life cycle emissions, not just the use phase emissions, that what is the fuel consumption and how much emissions are coming from the tailpipe, but also how much emissions are emitted in the vehicle manufacturing, as well as extraction of fuel and vehicle assembly and vehicle end of life. So that we are looking comprehensively at all these technology options. And all of these different components and their emissions, we kind of summarized in terms of grams of CO2 per kilometer traveled throughout the vehicle's lifetime. So it was all emissions and total distance the vehicle travels. And then that's how we get the gram CO2 equivalent per kilometer. In this study, we focused on three segments: a 12-ton rigid truck, a 16-ton urban bus, and a 55-ton tractor trailer. Now, these were chosen strategically to cover about 51% of the HDV sales in India. These three segments directly cover 51%. But the learnings from this study can also be applied to other segments. In terms of powertrain, we covered diesel, we covered CNG for the lighter trucks and the urban bus, LNG for the tractor trailer, and battery electric for all three vehicles, and fuel cell electric for all three vehicles. We compared the emissions from the vehicles in 2023, as well as how the vehicles will perform in year 2030 to have a temporal aspect also. Now, on the vehicle side, there are two sets of emissions. First is related to manufacturing of the vehicle. Here, the emission related to manufacturing are scaled by the vehicle weight. The heavier the vehicle weigh by its curb weight, the more emissions will be there in its manufacturing. And this is scaled up by 6% for CNG and LNG vehicles because they also have the gas tank. This data came from Scania. And for fuel cell, we scale the emissions on per tank basis. For battery, it's straightforward. Higher the kilowatt hour capacity of the battery, more emissions will be there in the manufacturing. We also have an assumption that most of these batteries will be LFP, and we consider one battery replacement cycle over the life of the vehicle. The life of the vehicle is 12 years for the bus based on literature, as well as the performance of the STUs. And for trucks, it is 15 years, considering the recommendations in the scrappage policy. The second life of batteries and hydrogen components recycling is not covered because we have limited data and limited processes happening in terms of recycling. We estimate that there will be 20% decline in the emissions related to manufacturing of batteries and fuel cell as the supply chains become optimized and we go to less emitting processes, and we learn about these technologies. Coming to the vehicle use phase, to have a fair comparison across these powertrains and to nullify the impact of different speeds and different external condition, we use simulation. We created virtual model for the diesel vehicles, a diesel 12-ton truck, a tractor trailer, a bus, and then we validated that model with the real world fuel consumption. Now that the diesel model is validated, we modified the diesel model. We removed the engine, we added the battery and the motor to make it battery electric. And another version, we added the fuel cell and the hydrogen tank to make it fuel cell. That's how we kept the comparison fair. And for natural gas vehicle, we estimated the gas consumption based on the equation from MOVES. So this is a US based model, motor vehicle emissions model. So we use that data. We assume a 4% cumulative reduction in terms of fuel consumption over the years. So this is estimating a business as usual approach. This is very less, but that's what the business as usual is. There is also an assumption on the advancement in technologies. So the battery density increases from 160 kilowatt hour per kilogram currently to about more than 200 or 234 kilowatt hour per kilogram in 2030. On the fuel cell side, we have kept the assumptions constant. We assume a 60% efficient fuel cell, and because we all are still learning and the fuel cell technology is developing, we have kept this efficiency as 60%. Coming on the vehicle side, do we want to continue? Okay. Coming on the vehicle, coming to the fuel side. On the fuel side, we have made some assumptions around the fossil fuels. For fossil fuels, we included the upstream emissions. That means the emissions related to extraction and processing of diesel fuel of the natural gas. So we cover all well-to-wheel emissions. The natural gas emissions are expressed both as 100-year global warming potential as well as 20-year global warming potential. Methane has higher global warming impact in the short term as compared to CO2. That's why we do this comparison of 20-year global warming potential versus 100-year global warming potential. For biofuels, in terms of biodiesel, we kept the share of biodiesel at 5% by 2030 and 10% by 2040. 5% is the goal, 10% we just extended that if the government decides to go forward on this. Similar thing happens with biomethane. On the electricity grid side, there are few assumptions. We used IEA's STEPS and SDS scenario. STEPS is a stated policy and SDS is a sustainable development scenario. I'll be going in more details when we explore the grid later. Then all these emissions from the vehicle charging, they are averaged over the lifetime of the vehicle based on grid average value, and then weighted as per how many VKTs the vehicle is traveling. So a vehicle travels more kilometers in the earlier years. So we give more weightage on the grid to the earlier years than later years. Another assumption is on the T&D side. Currently, our losses are at 19%, which is highest, which is among the highest. And we assume that because of modernization in grid, it can reduce up to 10% by 2030, which will become the global average. On the renewable energy side, we assume that all the renewable electricity that we will be using is additional. We are not replacing any demand which is already there for renewable energy. Then we assume a 2:2 ratio of solar to wind power. The renewable energy sources are not given zero emission because there is some life cycle cost associated to that. So we have assumed 35 gram CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour as the renewable energy life cycle emissions. We study the gray and green hydrogen separately. Now coming to the results, we focus firstly.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot, Aviral. I think before we get into results, I think maybe I'll just invite Dr. Hanif Qureshi, the Additional Secretary of Ministry of Heavy Industries, to share his insights on electrification of heavy-duty vehicles. And then we'll go into results and do some more conversation. So over to you, Dr. Qureshi.
Thank you, Amit. A very good afternoon
We
to
can't hear
all
you.
of you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me, Amit?
Yeah.
Okay. So I thank ICCT, Amit, and all the colleagues and panelists who are here. And as you know, that the country has set very ambitious targets for decarbonization, and a large proportion of the emissions in the transport sector comes from heavy duty vehicles, which is chiefly trucks. Also buses, but they are of a lesser number. Trucks are of a very high number. So a lot of emissions are from there. So the ministries of the government of India have been trying to look at this issue, and you are all aware about the numbers what we have. Particularly, Ministry of Heavy Industries is running several schemes, as you know. We are running the FAME scheme. FAME 2 has ended, but now we are formulating a next edition of this scheme where we want to give incentives for electric vehicles. And also we have the production linked incentive scheme. We have two PLI schemes. One is for the advanced chemistry cells, where the production of ACC cells will be incentivized. And there is also PLI auto scheme, where electric vehicles manufacturing is incentivized. Now we have been talking about electric trucks, and with which we had started this series of meetings, and that was that we must formulate a vision that in 2047, what should be our scenario of electric trucks? What should be the scenario of zero emission trucks? And in 2030, and in 2037, and in 100 days, there are some immediate things we want to do. So this involved identification of certain high infrastructure is required for electrification, that we cannot have it across the country. So definitely we will have it in a certain identified corridors. And that is also an exercise which needs to be done. And also we are very happy to note that there are several OEMs who have started production of electric trucks. And there are also several areas where electric trucks are already being used. So the scenario which we think is that even if some no government effort is there and no coordinated efforts are there, even then electric trucks are going to come. So that is what we are sure about it. But the idea is that how can we increase, how can we make the adoption faster, and how can we ease the pain which will come with the introduction of new technologies such as electric trucks. That is the whole point we have to think about it. And this will involve not only technological solutions, but also financial solutions. So our colleagues have talked to financial institutions, they have talked to NBFCs, they have talked to banks, that what are the issues in lending. We are also thinking about de-risking mechanism. We are also thinking about how to rope in DISCOMs and Ministry of Power, so that we can get reliable power for charging stations. So the idea of this stakeholder conference is that we must identify the bottlenecks. We must identify the issues which are hampering or hindering the growth of the electric trucks in the country. And then we must think about solutions. And all the solutions cannot come from the government. For instance, if the finance is a problem, say you have high interest rates on electric vehicles as compared to the ICE vehicles, or you have shorter tenures for electric trucks as compared to the ICE trucks, or you have lower LTVs as compared to the ICE. So these are not directions which the government can pass to the banks, but rather an ecosystem or an infrastructure has to be created. What has to be done? What are the bottlenecks? Some steps have to be taken by the banks and NBFCs and financial system. Those are the steps which industry has to take, financial industry. Similarly, we have to look at our own technological capability, downstream, the manufacturing. One associated aim is also to develop the downstream of it, the supply chain. We want that as much as possible, localization of the manufacturing process must be done. We cannot just import from other countries. Of course, there is no bar on importing, but electrification is there, but electrification with a caveat that as much as possible should be domestically manufactured. So that also we must look into what can help the suppliers to manufacture, they get a stable demand. That also we have to look into. So therefore, when we talk about increasing the number of electric trucks out of the trucks operating now, we have to think in 6 or 7 dimensions. Charging infrastructure, financial, the cost of the electric trucks, the establishment of either it is battery swapping or it is charging, or it is only restricting the trucks to shorter distances where we do not need very heavy batteries. There are a lot of applications where only shorter distance trucking would be required. There we have to identify the low-hanging fruits, because once the success of electric trucks is seen by the larger society, then the adoption will also increase. So early successes are very important. And also we need to do some kind of IEC activities to showcase the importance of electric trucks, showcase the importance of decarbonization, and at the pace at which decarbonization can happen. Of course, we are looking at all electric vehicles, but the impact that electric trucks can make, that is multiple times what ordinary vehicles like 2, 3-wheelers or 4-wheelers can make. And therefore, I would request that all of you please do contribute your knowledge to this document which we are going to make. Which this will be like a comprehensive document which will say that these are the issues which are hampering the electric trucks, and this is what the Ministry of Power needs to do. This is what Ministry of Heavy Industry needs to do. This is what OEMs need to do. This is what the NBFCs and banks need to do. This is what whoever is involved, stakeholders need to do. And that kind of a document we want. So my request to you is that do contribute as much as possible and lend your knowledge, your experience, which ICCT has, again, I'm grateful to them. Very kindly, they have agreed to listen to all of you, to collect all of this knowledge and make a document. Once this document is ready, which will have the identify the constraints, it will identify the stakeholders, it will list out the solutions, and it will give action points to what each of us is required to do. If that draft document is ready, then that can be circulated amongst everyone, and we can invite more suggestions so that we are all on the same page that what each of us is doing. And I think that all of us belong to different organizations, but at this point, we are thinking about environment, we are thinking about our country, how our manufacturing process, our use of electric trucks can increase, and how can we contribute to a faster decarbonization that our Honorable Prime Minister has laid down as nationally determined contributions. So those things we have to do. Already a lot of, I have seen many PowerPoints which have been prepared, and they have very good information. Now the need is that a lot of good work has been done. And I always say that if we collect that good work, my whole room will be filled up of all the books and all the reports. So much of work has been done. But our target here is very limited. We are not doing a PhD in electric trucks, which will take many years. But our target here is to simply make an actionable plan that this is what we need to do. And of course, we are not going to touch the sky in a few days. These are very complex problems. As in Australia, they say that these are nasty problems or difficult problems, and they do not have a ready-made solution. They cannot be done in 1 or 2 days, but they require the coordination of a large number of stakeholders, and they require a lot of deliberations. So all those we have to go through the difficult steps. So once I read a book, the book was on success, and the chapters were listed, and the last chapter was shortcut to success. So I immediately went to the chapter and I read it. So it said that there is no shortcut to success. Go to chapter 1, read the whole book. So there is no, we say, ki, bhai, Amit, please tell in 5 minutes that this is to be done. So there is no person who can say in 5 minutes that you do these steps and you will have electric trucks. That is not possible. So we realize the challenge which is there before us, but let us make a beginning, and that is why I plan in phases: 2030, 2037, and 2047. What is our Prime Minister who has envisioned a Viksit Bharat in 2047? We must look at that. And an implementable plan is what we have to make. One thing is for sure, that Government of India is committed to decarbonization, is committed to electric vehicles, and is committed to giving fiscal and non-fiscal incentives both, and to playing a role of a coordinator between all the stakeholders so that we are on the same page. And I am again thankful to all of you. You have spared your time, and I hope that you will contribute to this discussion and take it forward. Thank you so much, Amit.
Thanks a lot, sir. This is very, very insightful. What you said is that in terms of how do we develop a roadmap for electrification of trucks, and that's absolutely important. I think that is one of the reasons why ICCT, in partnership with HDVs, to organize this webinar, so that we can have a much larger consultation and feedback on looking at emission and the net zero target. So again, thank you, sir, for joining. And now I would ask my colleague Aviral to take the conversation forward.
Thanks, Dr. Qureshi and Amit. I'll continue with the presentation. I hope it is on full screen. Okay. So just am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I cannot let it be. So just a quick recap on the goals and some assumptions. So we are covering 3 segments: 12-ton truck, 16-ton urban bus, and 55-ton tractor trailer. And this cumulatively covers 51% of the HDV sales. And the learnings can also be translated to other segments. In terms of powertrain, we are looking at diesel, CNG, LNG, battery electric, and fuel cell truck. And we have already gone through some of the assumptions related to manufacturing, that we will be using LFP batteries and considering one replacement over the life of the vehicle. The second life of the batteries and hydrogen component recycling is not covered. In terms of vehicle usage, we are using simulations to have that same benchmark for all powertrains. And we assume a 4% reduction in fuel consumption, organic reduction in fuel consumption till 2030. The battery density will improve from 160 watt-hour per kilogram in 2023 to 234 in 2030. Now, coming on the assumptions on fuel side, we were at the electricity grid. So the electricity grid, we are assuming 3 scenarios. IEA's steps, which is stated policy scenario, whatever the policymakers and the government have already committed, that comes under the step scenario. The other scenario is SDS, or sustainable development scenario, which is more aggressive and has higher renewable energy penetration. We will also look at a totally renewable energy based scenario. Then in terms of renewable energy and green hydrogen, we assume that all the renewable electricity for the charging of these vehicles will be additional and will not be taking power away from already using services. There will be a ratio of 2:1 for solar to wind, and we assign a lifetime emissions of 35 grams CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour to renewable energy. We study the gray and green hydrogen separately, because although India has an ambition of 500 million tons of green hydrogen production, we do not know how much will be coming for what sector. So that's why we study gray and green hydrogen separately. Now coming to the results, I'll be showing an example of tractor trailer and showing most of the results here. each of this column shows the lifetime GHG emissions on per kilometer basis. So all the emissions that the vehicle has caused, and when we divide it by all the kilometers that it has traveled, we get a per kilometer number, so that it is easy to compare. And each of this column has, first one is diesel, and we assume that there will be 5% biodiesel blending as the vehicle is sold in 2023, and as the life increases to 15 years, there will be some biofuel blending. Second column is on the LNG plus biogas. The third column shows the battery electric vehicles, the heavy duty vehicles, but these are based on the current and projected grid mix based on current policies. So how the grid averages out between 2023 and 2037, the third column shows that scenario. The fourth column is totally renewable energy based electric vehicles. The fifth one is fuel cell. If we use natural gas, hydrogen to power fuel cell, what are the emissions? And the last one is fuel cell, but powered by totally renewable generated hydrogen, so green hydrogen. And we are seeing different colors, though that shows the different components of the vehicle life. There is some emissions related to manufacturing of vehicle, which are shown in gray. Then some dark blue, we are seeing the fuel consumption, or what is the energy consumed for making that fuel, that is shown by light gray. Now, if we look at the results broadly, one thing we clearly understand that battery EVs, totally powered by renewables, are the best way forward. But that is just a scenario, like totally powered by renewables, that can happen over time. But if we look at what is possible currently, we see that battery EVs are performing better than LNG. And in case of other segments, we'll see then better than CNG also. And we have lower emissions. Now, one thing that you are seeing is a hashed part on the top of the LNG related and the natural gas related charts. So that shows us what are the emissions when we compared the methane leakage and its 20-year global warming potential. Methane is has a high global warming potential in short term. So if we consider that, and that lot of methane is slipping in the supply chain, then actually LNG pathways, natural gas pathways, are worst from the life cycle emissions perspective. The battery electric currently are about 17 to 29% lower with the current projected grid mix. And in the 2030 scenario, because the grid becomes cleaner and the battery manufacturing itself gets a little bit cleaner, so the gap between diesel and battery rises. And similar thing happens for the fuel cell based on green hydrogen. Another finding is that fuel cell, if powered by natural gas, is not giving that much benefits in terms of GHG reductions. It is almost same as diesel powered vehicle. So yeah, if we have to use fuel cell, maybe we should look at only green hydrogen. Moving to the other segment, we find similar results. Here we see that the rigid truck has actually lower battery capacity and weight. So that's why the battery related emissions are a little bit less compared to the tractor trailer. But overall, the trend is same. Coming to the buses, again, the natural gas, we see a lot of shift to electric bus, and our research kind of supports that electric buses are kind of the best way forward when we compare the life cycle and the methane's 20-year global warming potential. Then we explored the impact of grid. We always hear that no, grid is not clean, so battery electric vehicles are not making sense. So for that, we explored these three scenarios: the step scenario or stated policy scenario, where we see the average emissions between 2023 and 2037, and the sustainable development scenario, which is higher renewable energy and totally battery EVs powered by renewables. And the results, and what happens in the stated policy scenario is that the coal share decreases to 55% by 2030 from the current 70%. And the sustainable development scenario, it decreases to 30% by 2030 and by just to 5% by 2040. So these are aggressive scenarios. And the results are, for the step scenario, by 2023, we get emission reduction in the range of 17 to 30%. And for the more aggressive renewable based scenario, we get emission reduction in the range of 80%. So most likely, although future cannot be predicted, our emissions will lie somewhere between the stated policy scenario and sustainable development scenario. But in all cases, we see that battery emissions are very low compared to diesel ones. We are currently also hearing a lot about hydrogen. So we studied hythane, which is a 18% blend of natural gas and hydrogen. We compared what if this hydrogen is coming from fossil fuels, what if this hydrogen is coming from, it is a green hydrogen, and what is the impact? So the key takeaway here is we understand that if hydrogen is to be used, it should be used only in fuel cell, and it should be green. Natural gas hydrogen doesn't provide much emission reduction, even in the fuel cell, let alone the normal combustion engines. So the key conclusions and the key takeaways are battery electric heavy duty vehicles produced in India can provide the greatest GHG emission reduction. The emission savings from the battery electric heavy duty vehicles will keep on growing, and the gap between the diesel and the electric will keep on rising as the grid gets decarbonized. Biofuel blending has limited impact. Even when we blend 5%, we only get 2% emissions savings, with 5%, which is still difficult to attain. At best, natural gas heavy duty vehicles provide modest GHG savings, and when we compare the near-term impact, they are actually worse. Blending of hydrogen in LNG has very low emission benefits, and the overall benefits of hydrogen depends on its source. If it is green, yeah, then they will provide good benefits, but if it is gray, they are as good as diesel. So I'll conclude my first study here. And now that we have all the pathways, let's hand over to Namita to explore how to go forward with the ZET, what is required in terms of the penetration level. Over to Namita.
Thank you, Avirul. So I'll be presenting on assessing the scale of zero emission truck deployment required for meeting India's net zero goal. Please move to the next slide. So as Avirul already explained in his presentation, different technology and fuel pathways to reduce life cycle HDT emissions. In this paper, we have assessed their scale of zero emission truck deployment under different policy scenarios. So we can ensure that the pace of ZET adoption, it aligns with our national goal. Now, as we have already seen in the previous presentation, HDTs have very high on-road carbon emissions and also life cycle emissions, though their share in the fleet is very low. And the policy support in electrification of HDT, it has lagged compared to other on-road segments in India. So with this, we have evaluated the impact of ZET penetration and analyzed the fleet tank-to-wheel and well-to-wheel carbon emissions. Please move to next slide. So for the assessment, we have followed this methodology, which is a bottom-up approach, and it's based on ASIF framework, which is activity structure, energy intensity, and fuel carbon. For this, we have used ICCT's roadmap model. So here you can see in the plot, the first column shows the key input which goes into the model. And some of these inputs vary depending on the scenarios which we have analyzed. So these inputs, they combine to give us the key output which we have used in our analysis, which is vehicle stock, total activity, energy consumption, and tank-to-wheel and well-to-wheel CO2 emissions. The paper goes in detail in explaining these input variables. So I'll recommend please look into the paper. So these scenarios which we have analyzed, in the next slide will explain what will give a brief description of these scenarios. Please move to next slide. Yeah. So these are the scenarios which we have analyzed. In the baseline, so the baseline scenario is our reference scenario, where we have assumed no new policies after 2021, and we have not assumed ZET penetration, also ICE improvement, and zero hydrogen adoption. For the grid, we have assumed IEA stated policy scenario, and we have not assumed any additional policy assumptions. Whereas in India 2070 net zero, it focuses on ZET penetration to align with India's climate goal. And here we have assumed an ambitious improvement in the fuel efficiency, which is around 40% in diesel truck. And we have also assumed a 100% ZET sales by 2050, along with ambitious decarbonized grid, green hydrogen. And as an additional policy, we have assumed scrappage of the heavy duty trucks which are older than, or which are at least 20 years old and are still present in the fleet, which contribute to the residual emissions. The ambitious scenario which we have assumed in our analysis, it's the most aggressive decarbonization scenario. And here some of the policies are similar to India 2070 net zero scenario. However, here our pace of ZET adoption is at a faster rate, which is we have assumed 100% ZET sales by 2045. And in the additional policy assumptions, we have assumed scrappage of 15 years old diesel truck along with avoidance shift in VKT by improvement in freight logistics. Next slide, please. So this slide, it shows that the ZET sales, which we have assumed in our baseline net zero 2070 and ambitious scenario. So here you can see that in the baseline, we have not assumed ZET sales. However, in India net zero 2070 and ambitious, the pace, it shows the pace of ZET adoption over the years. So in the ambitious scenario, we have assumed 80% battery electric truck sales and 20% fuel cell electric truck sales by 2045. And in India net zero 2070, we have assumed similar ratio, but that adoption, it happens by 2050. And based on this, we'll show the results of our analysis. Yeah, so this is the key result. It shows that tank to wheel CO2 emission from the LDT segment. So it shows that without any policy interventions, our tank to wheel carbon emission, they rise by 2.5 times compared to the baseline level. But on introducing different policies, such as fuel efficiency improvement, we can reduce carbon emission by 40% in 2070. And on adopting our net zero 2070 policy, we can reduce 100% carbon emission by 2070. Ambitious, which has a very aggressive pathway, it reduces 100% carbon emissions by 2060. So this is our tank to wheel carbon dioxide emission from HDT segment. Now we will move to the annual well to wheel CO2 emissions from our different scenarios. So here also, the most important thing to see is that, again, the baseline emission, it rises continuously, but with different policy scenarios, we are able to reduce well-to-wheel CO2 emissions. With ICE improvement, again, we are able to achieve 40% reduction. And then we have also analyzed an alternate scenario where we have only adopted on-road ZET penetration, but we have not used a clean grid and green hydrogen. So in that condition, we will only be able to achieve 76% of carbon reduction. However, when we complement our ZET adoption with the clean grid and green hydrogen, we are able to achieve 96% of CO2 emission reduction by 2070 in the net zero scenario. And in the ambitious scenario, we are able to achieve 97% of CO2 emission reduction by 2070. So these are the two important findings which help us to understand decarbonization rate in LDT segment for if you want to look forward towards India's climate goal. However, we have also analyzed the cumulative well-to-wheel CO2 emissions. So most important thing in this slide is that with ZET adoption and clean grid, we are able to achieve cumulative emission reduction in the long run. And in order to have a CO2 emission reduction in the initial years, we can have the support of additional policies such as ICE improvement, scrappage, and avoidance shift. So, and this cumulative emission is an important parameter because it influences the global temperature. So that's why we have shown this analysis as well. So moving to the next slide, which is the conclusion from a study. So we can say that if for India to achieve its 2070 climate goal, it should achieve 100% ZET sales of new electric trucks by no later than 2050. And in order to align with the global pathway, which is to limit the warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, ZET sales should further accelerate to reach 30% by 2030 and 100% by 2045. And in all these scenarios, grid decarbonization is a very vital, important policy assumptions. So to sum it up, we can say that decarbonization in the HDT segment can be achieved through ZET penetration and grid decarbonization, and other additional policies can also support in attaining this emission reduction objectives. So this is an important analysis for and HDT segment is one of the very important segment on the roads in the road transport sector to achieve decarbonization. And as India moved towards the vision of Viksit Bharat and energy independence, we should look into these measures for decarbonization of this segment. So with this, I'll hand it over to Amit. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Namita, and thanks, Avril. Before we bring in our experts, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box to type the questions. Some of the questions that require immediate answer or some clarification, the authors will type it. And some of the questions will require slightly larger deliberation. We will definitely take it up post the intervention we get from our experts who have joined us. Okay, so with that in mind, let me first bring in Ms. Anumita Rai Chaudhary. Anumita, you heard the presentation. You also heard what the Additional Secretary said in his intervention. My question to you is that based on your interaction with some of these stakeholders, what can you highlight? What are the pathways that are being considered for India's HDT heavy-duty vehicle decarbonization? And the second part of this question is, in your opinion, what do you think is the most promising pathway?
Right. So first of all, Amit, it was great to hear the findings of your study. And it once again shows that how important and powerful it is to generate our own data and evidence to support the roadmap that is needed for the net zero transition. So having said that, so clearly now, and as you're saying, that how do we understand the pathway? And first of all, how the stakeholders are discussing the pathway today for heavy-duty trucks and heavy-duty vehicles. So for the first time, and that's the very opportune time, and I'm glad you've done the study at this level, that for a long time, finding solution to truck was such a challenge. And cities could not think anything beyond regulating and restricting movement of trucks. Now we have come a long way from there, and today we do have big ticket ideas, and clean technology options and fuels have emerged for trucks. And this technology is taking shape, and suddenly there is quite a bit of excitement in the market. And the question for us, and the question that we are asking, so what must inform the pathway? Now, currently, when we talk to different stakeholders, industry, policymakers, and others, what is very clear that a conversation is happening at two different levels. One, within the ICE framework, the internal combustion framework, that we need to improve fuel economy regulations for energy savings for a heavy-duty segment, and also that we need to also opt for some of these intermediate options like LNG, biofuels, like that. And then the second level of conversation is around the solutions and what you are discussing and what is emerging from your study, the more transformative solutions like the electric trucks or the fuel cell trucks. Now that the policy discussion has started, this means that if we begin to put so many options on the table, it clearly is going to confuse the market and the investment priorities. And therefore, we need to develop a clear criteria for deciding the roadmap. And one, very clearly, what is again emerging from your study, the choice has to be against the net zero goal and what is needed to get there. And your study is showing that 100% by the long term and 30% by 2030. But if that is the ambition, is that what is we need, then the question is no longer choosing between a dirty and a clean technology. It is now the choice is between cleaner, clean, and most clean. And that's the kind of yardstick that we really need to apply. So we need very careful emission profiling, as you have done the study. And the message from your study is so clear that the battery electric trucks are better than diesel, hydrogen, and even natural gas counterparts, and in reducing the lifetime GHG emissions. And fuel cell truck also on hydrogen produced from fossil fuel will reduce emission. It's not going to be so great, and therefore you really need to link it with the RE. So that's very clear that natural gas trucks provide marginal improvement. So if ZEV is so clearly, from my perspective, ZEV is emerging as the doable, feasible, and the popular choice to inform the future pathways. But what your study is also showing that the maturity in the market is largely post 2030 for the electric trucks, and that it is but then it is important, even if we are targeting an ambitious scenario by 2030, the preparation for it, preparedness for it has to start today. And that's the critical point. And therefore, to inform the choices, we really have to be very careful and delineate the use cases, because it's just not enough to say that we are just going to do it. Because ZEV is a very new technology, and therefore we really have to understand that how the electric trucks, along with this ecosystem, and how that can be introduced within a given time frame, and that can be done more cost effectively with clear strategies. And for that, we need to obviously identify the clear use cases, like Mr. Qureshi was referring to. That to begin with the short range, and how do we do that? So there could be so the message, to end my first round, the message is very clear that what I've heard so far, that we must not send confusing signals to the market with too many choices dangling, right? Because this is going to, investments have a huge opportunity costs and must not be spread thin. So we need to be careful about locking in investment in not so effective solutions, but we prioritize the choices that will decide the infrastructure for the future, because infrastructure, once created, cannot be undone easily. And therefore, it kind of locks in our choices for the future. So clearly, I would say that let's therefore prioritize to decide the future pathways around the ZEV mandate and linked with the whole renewable energy portfolio. So that's my immediate takeaway.
Thanks, Anumita. Absolutely. I think we'll have to prioritize what delivers the best. And on that, I'll bring in Sunil from IPLT. Sunil, you are probably the first ones to bring electric trucks in India. My question is, one, given your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face in kind of scaling up the production of these trucks, as well as deployment of these trucks in India?
Yeah. See, basically, we have taken this call around 4 years back, and we started production of electric trucks around 3 years back. And last 2 years, we are selling this heavy duty truck of 55 ton in the market. Our trucks are designed mainly working in the ports or mines, or maybe heavy construction area, cement industry and all that. So these are 55 ton heavy duty trucks designed accordingly. Now, the challenge what is coming, see, technology wise, we are not facing any challenge, because we have a large team of around 100 people working in R&D, and technology wise, we have no issue at all. Battery wise also, we have no issue, because we have our own assembly plant of 2.2 gigawatt hour, which is in place, because battery is the major cost in the truck. So production wise, there is no issue. We have a present production capacity of around 6,000 trucks per annum of 55 ton each in a single shift. So capacity wise also there is no issue. Problem is that this thing is not picking up, because government in the initial schemes of FAME 1 and FAME 2 has prioritized the passenger thing and the mass rapid transport and all that. And electric trucks, we were not having any subsidy. Like in electric bus, there is a subsidy of 20,000 rupees per kilowatt hour. So that amounts to close to 50 lakh rupees in a bus. similar kind of subsidy is not available in the trucks. So upfront cost is a big challenge, what we are facing. Production and technology, there is no challenge. Last 2 years, our trucks are running very well. Some of the trucks even have done 3 lakh kilometers and still they are running good. So technology-wise, there is no issue. The group is very strong. It is a Murugupa group company. So we have a legacy and our TI Mobility and all those companies are very popular. So there is no issue other than that how it will pick, because like in past we have seen EASL has come with a tender of around 10,000 cars some 2 years back. So that kind of thrust is required basically, that for the government PSUs or government organization or something, these trucks are put on the site and people see that how they are working, because they are working very well wherever we have supplied, like in cement plants and all these places, they are working exceedingly well. And all these people are coming back to us and everybody is buying 10 to 20 trucks because the performance is so good, they are so happy, efficiency is so good. So all those things are there, but still a push from government is required.
Thanks for this precise and very crisp reply that we need some policy push to scale up the adoption. On that, I will bring in Mr. Ivy Rao. Rao sir, as you heard from the presentation, largely two pathways. One is battery electric, other is hydrogen fuel cell. But there are also other powertrains that are being discussed. So in your opinion, what's the kind of long-term pathway that one should look at, especially when you're looking at this GHG reduction and the 2070 target that was discussed earlier?
Yeah, I would like to first compliment Viral and his team for the excellent study on LCA for different options for heavy duty trucks. And the study shows that electric HDVs are the best solution in long term. I strongly believe that electrification of mobility is the right solution for addressing the all the issues for reducing the carbon footprint of mobility and also affecting the GHG emissions. But at this juncture, I personally feel the other segments like two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and to some extent buses have got good traction, and we are seeing good penetration in these areas. And in case of heavy-duty trucks, because of the cost factors, and also it's a totally new technology, and the transport, I mean, heavy-duty transport truck operations in India are very different compared to other developed countries. And considering all these things, I personally feel maybe we should push electrification of heavy-duty trucks slowly, gradually, and not in a, I mean, I'm sure in any case, electrification of whatever vehicles is taking place gradually. So I also feel that we need to work on alternate solutions also, along with electrification of trucks. And with all these PLI schemes, what government has come out with would be localizing most of the parts required for electrification. So the cost impact of electrification also is likely to come down. So that may be the time when it could be pushed for heavy duty vehicles, especially because the battery, the capacity of the battery is extremely high in case of heavy duty vehicles to cover for the required range. And as a result, the cost is very, very high. Also, I have some comments about the life cycle assessment actually. I'm not doubting the results what have been showcased by ICCT study, but somehow every time a LCA, I mean, related study results are published by different researchers, every study is concluding totally contradictory conclusions. Of course, it all depends upon any LCA study would depend upon what are the boundary conditions you are assuming, what is the life cycle range you are considering, what is the kilometer coverage you are considering, and all these factors impact the comparative impact, I mean, CO2 impact from these vehicles. So I very strongly believe that it's high time we should all work together to come out with the standardization of conditions for LCA studies. Otherwise, every report which is coming out is talking differently on these issues. Actually, I wanted to request Additional Secretary to take up this so that a BA standard is made for doing these studies. The other point I have about, about electrification of heavy duty vehicles is, why other developed countries are still not going in a big way for electric heavy duty vehicles? Why, should we take what should I say, overtake them in doing this, and why? That is a question I have, because everything said and done, the cost of heavy duty vehicles is going to be very high at this juncture, and also a lot of operators who are small, having one or two vehicles, will not be able to, convert to electric heavy duty trucks.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Rao. I think the 2 points you raised very importantly, and that fits in very well with the next speaker. So Nikita, you heard patiently from the presentation as well as the comments. My question first to you is that the findings that you see from India, is it similar to what LCA has been done in other parts of the world? And the second part, which Mr. Rao said, why are electric trucks not being taken up in other parts of the world, especially Europe and US?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So first, I think it's really important to emphasize just how much common ground there is in the results across the different regions. So in the EU and the US and our LCA, we see very similar overall trends as in the India region, though of course there's differences in the specific results. And these specific results are primarily driven by the relative efficiency of the different vehicle powertrains. In other words, how much fuel, how much electricity the vehicle consumes per kilometer, and the composition of the electricity grid. The impact of vehicle manufacturing, I see a lot of questions about this in the Q&A, was surprisingly secondary. The emissions from manufacturing are greatly exceeded by the use phase emissions for actually consuming fuel over that long vehicle lifetime. So in other words, the manufacturing emissions are much less important than what type of fuel is consumed over a vehicle's lifetime and that vehicle's efficiency. Another surprising result I found was the limited impact of alternative fuels. And we saw this across the regions we studied, and this is largely due to their low blending rates. So for example, in the US, we rely very highly on some more emissions-intensive biofuels like corn or soy that themselves have very little greenhouse gas impact, but this is compounded by their very low blends. So a 10% blend of ethanol that doesn't very much reduce emissions in the US is also limited not just by its emission factor, but also by its low blend rate. So in India, though we assumed a reliance on lower carbon waste-based biofuels, such as renewable diesel based on stated policies, we found that this was overall having a lower impact on the aggregate, though these fuels had a low climate impact on a per liter basis. The blend rate was just very small out into that 2030, 2040 time window. So then getting back to ZEVs, so we found that in India specifically, battery electric trucks were capable of achieving the greatest life cycle greenhouse gas savings, but the exact greenhouse gas savings varied quite a bit depending on your scenario. So we found that for a truck entering the fleet in the near term, the composition of the electricity grid resulted in much higher emissions in the US or the EU, Having said that, this pathway still reduced emissions by 17 to 29% compared to diesel, but that's not as much as the EU's about 60% savings with their current grid, but it's also not as much as the theoretical 80% reduction you'd see with fully renewable electricity for trucks in India, but it still beats the alternative technologies. One other thing that really came out of this study for India specifically was the results for battery electric trucks suggested that electrification was what you could call a no-regret solution. They generate some greenhouse gas reductions today with today's electricity grid, but as the grid improves, this relative improvement also compounds and grows significantly. That means that there's part of this analysis that's not just about policy recommendations for the transport sector, but also policy recommendations for the electricity sector, because improvements there complement changes here, reducing transmission distribution losses, reducing the share of coal in the grid, deploying more renewables. This can all quickly increase the gap between electric and diesel. Also, Amit, just to respond to your last point about why the take-up of heavy-duty vehicles has also been slow in EU and in the US, I think this is all downstream of policy. We've had some success on light duty. The technology gaps are lower there, but in heavy duty, we're still behind, though we are seeing the first steps taken, and it's largely due to new policies. We've seen the heavy duty efficiency standards finally released in the EU. We're expecting to see some uptake of ZEVs in response to that. And we're also moving forward with heavy duty standards in the US that should create a stronger signal for those trucks to finally enter the market.
Thanks, Nikita. I think it's very useful, especially on the regulations which are coming in and their impact on the uptake of zero emission vehicles. I think that's very important, and I think it's a point well taken in terms of how do you scale up, and which is actually in line with what Sunil said, that how do you bring in some policies that can accelerate these vehicle segment is going to be very important. I will ask one more round of questions, and I will request a quick reply from all the experts, and so that we can open it up for the audience. Anumita, again, bringing you back in the conversation, is that while we have seen electrification of other form factors taking up pretty aggressively in India, trucks have been left behind. And so in your understanding, what should be done to kind of accelerate the truck adoption, especially do we have any one or two important policy levers that we can use for scaling up electric trucks?
Absolutely. So just to tell you that, yes, while we have seen a lot more electrification in other segments, the smaller vehicles, but even there, the question that is coming up now is that for to make the program scalable, you need regulatory targets and mandate. And so clearly, we have to think on those lines, but keeping in mind that electric truck is a very new idea. And we have not yet gained enough experience in operating those vehicles, even though, and we have just heard Mr. Bhatnagar, it seems that the industry, which is now developing several models, and there is considerable confidence now in the industry that this is possible and we can make it happen. So therefore, to be able to meet an ambitious target, it is important to think through that how in case of trucks, we can design regulatory targets, not like a standard target, but maybe more specific to different use cases along with enablers. That's something that we really have to think through as we go forward. And while doing that, and from our experience, because about a year ago when we did a stakeholder perception survey on electric trucks, for talking to the OEMs, to the logistics, and to the charging providers, it was very clear that to be able to design a good policy, as Mr. Qureshi has also been emphasizing, that we have to understand their issues and to build support for the strategy of the key stakeholders. And for that, and it was very interesting that even then when we had talked to the OEMs, even though they were cautious, but they've still identified and indicated what kind of requirements or operative conditions can enable application and scalability of electric trucks. For instance, they indicated that an operational range of perhaps 1.2 lakh kilometers a year, or about 80,000 to 90,000 kilometers of route per day. I mean, that's a kind of numbers they are giving to say that that is what is needed to make an e-truck viable and to be able to achieve the price parity with ICE vehicles. So it's very important for us, therefore, to understand that what is the need, requirement, and the issues that we have to address, and for that whole promise for electrification, and therefore go accordingly. And there's a huge need, as I said, of the just incentive. This incentive is a very good step forward, but along with that, the whole regulatory framework is absolutely necessary, and the OEMs pointing out the need for policy steps for infrastructure development, battery technology advancements, customer acceptance from the truck entrepreneurs and service providers, etc. So if we go stakeholder by stakeholder, whether the logistic, whether the charging providers, and to understand that what are the concerns around costs of infrastructure expansion, upgradation of the grid distribution level, management of peak electricity, what kind of changes are needed, and all of the logistic perspective that they need much better clarity about the business case for e-truck adoption with limited financing, incentive, freight, fair rates, all of that. That is their major concern today. So if we are able to demystify several of these issues and help to develop a clear roadmap on each one of them, like we have seen it happening in the case of buses, where through the different phases of development, the bus financing strategy, procurement strategy, demand application strategy have evolved to the extent today that we are talking about payment guarantee, etc., that kind of things. So that's where the learning is and the lessons are for us to understand how to take this forward. And the last point that I just want to highlight, that this is exactly the time to do this when we know that the policy opportunities are emerging today with the FAME interest that we have just heard Mr. Qureshi about, and also the pilot scheme that the Principal Scientific Advisor Office is talking about to pilot electric trucks operation here. And the last, and which is much closer to our region, Delhi NCR, it's very interesting that I just recall that way back in 2018-19, around that time, when the Supreme Court had asked for a strategy for truck fleet renewal in the Delhi NCR, and they had wanted to know how to do that. At that point of time, EPCA had made a recommendation saying that even when we did not have an electric truck in the horizon, but the broad recommendation was that the old fleet can be replaced, and then the options were CNG, hybrid, and electric. But the electric was included even then. And based on that, in January 2024, this year, we actually got a direction from the Supreme Court as giving reference to that recommendation that the central government, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, has to come back with a policy by July this year, and saying very clearly that fleet renewal where you can and where you can promote use of CNG, hybrid, and electric again. So clearly understand where the opportunity is as this opens up, and this is another way of bringing the whole idea and the narrative around target and mandate once again, like the way we had seen this happening earlier with the CNG program. But only difference is this time we can be and we need to be a lot more innovative about how do we design the targets and mandate with clear enablers. That's what I want to share.
Thanks, Anumita. This is very, very useful. On target and mandate bit, I think that's very important conversation. Sunil, just one follow-up quickly for you. One big issue is around range, and how has been the experience with your electric trucks in terms of range and how it has impacted the operations?
Yeah, range is not a big issue. I will tell you, one of the report of ICCT states that trucks are generally covering close to 59,000 kilometers in a year. So it is close to 5,000 kilometers in a month, maybe 200 kilometers per day, not more than that. So in our truck, in one charge, our truck is doing close to 225 kilometers. So range is not issue. Fast charging is available. We can do around close to 500 kilometers per day in our truck very easily. There is no problem because in night you can charge and in day you can do one cycle. Then again you charge for 90 minutes and do another cycle. So with our trucks you can do even close to 600 to 700 kilometers per day. So range is not a problem at all. I was also reading at one table somewhere in your report that somebody was quoting about 455 kilowatt hour battery. So that kind of battery will be a damaging thing. Why I will tell you, we use a 258 kilowatt hour battery, which is close to 2 ton in weight. So if you go for a 455 kilowatt hour battery, it will be close to 4 to 5 ton of the weight. And your overall weight of loading will reduce in that case. And the cost of the truck will go so high because battery cost is around close to 40% in the truck. So the battery cost will go high. So there is no point if you are getting around close to 250 kilometer of the range in 258 kilowatt hour battery, then I think it is a perfect thing to do. And our R&D is doing more options available, like we are working on a swapping a system. We have already developed a battery swap system for electric trucks also. So there is no issue in that also. So 600 to 700 kilometer per day, our truck can do easily. There is one more reason, because there is no engine, so the heat dissipation is not an issue in our case. There is a powertrain. The cabin is very cool in our case. The driver efficiency is very high. There is a two driver system in our trucks, so that is not an issue at all. And one thing I would like to add what Dr. Ivy Rao was saying about the European and Indian thing. See, in Europe, the system is slightly different as far as these norms are concerned. Like BS6 came very late to India, and they are following very strict norms from the beginning. Their infra is very good, and the kind of population and kind of the freight we are handling in India, we are the second largest populated country. So the kind of population on the road and the kind of infra we have on the roads. So definitely our problem is slightly different than the developed countries. So from my point of view, it is a need of an hour to consider electric trucks in a big way to reduce the pollution because these old trucks are polluting so much. The sales of the trucks is only 2% of the total automobile sales. But if you take the road pollution, it is close to 40% from them. So it is a big challenge for us to address. And it is the right time to address this thing. So that's from my side.
Thanks, Sunil. Nikita, two questions. One is from anonymously from the audience, is that the question is, are the batteries in trucks same as cars? If you want to answer that. And second question, which also keep coming up, is what happens to this battery when it meets its useful life? If you could share some experience from the European or the US market.
I can also
Sure.
answer if required later.
Sure. Yeah. For the purposes of this study on the climate impacts, the primary difference is just the increased battery size. You're taking a larger vehicle, a longer distance. That's going to have implications on the size, the weight, the manufacturing emissions intensity of the battery. Now, on batteries end of life and second use, I think this question gets to something very interesting. So when a battery is at the end of life for a truck, it isn't necessarily at the end of its useful life, and and final disposal may not be its actual destination. So in other words, it can go on to other uses, and that means we may not be done assessing its emissions implications. So our choice of assuming disposal is therefore a relatively conservative worst case scenario, and there's better alternatives, though we're still very limited by data. So for example, the materials used to construct a battery can still hold value even if it's no longer suitable for a truck, and they may be repurposed at end of life, which could be treated as a partial credit for the battery trucks. So we could reduce the size of that yellow bar on that life cycle chart that we showed earlier, reducing the emissions for the battery electric truck even further. But more interestingly, we're also now seeing a vast increase in new construction of utility scale battery deployments for the electricity grid in the US, which we're very likely to see soon in other regions. And in other words, this means that batteries are being deployed alongside wind and solar at really large scales to store energy during periods of low costs and sell to the grids at periods of high cost or need. And this can be expensive, but we're still seeing it pencil out. We're still seeing investors pursuing this as a low-cost strategy. If that's going to be a destination for vehicle batteries that may not be suitable for the vehicle duty cycle anymore, but could still be viable there, that's going to be a low-cost alternative that will make those projects even cheaper and could be a very valuable destination for those batteries and replace the need for new materials, new batteries, and could adjust the value of the emissions factor for batteries for this type of LCA further. I think we still need a few years to exactly track the destinations of batteries in the heavy duty sector to better understand where they're going and what they're being used for. But we could expect that in a future revision, we can incorporate this end-of-life behavior into the LCA.
Thanks, Nikita, for this answers and clarifications. So we'll take some questions from the audience.
Amit, I just want to add
Yeah.
something.
Please go ahead.
Before we actually go into a big scale induction of electric trucks into market, I think it's required to do some pilots, either within the factories like the steel plants or thermal stations, cement factories where a lot of trucks operate, where most of the trucks could be electric, and because it's known distance and also known application, so it can be monitored. And also we need to do real life trials on the actual usage, in the actual usage conditions, so that we need to know how the electric trucks will behave, the way we operate in India and the way our driver and attendant attends to the vehicles. I think that's very, very important, because the electric truck is a totally new machine and new animal for the drivers. The conventional truck drivers. So a lot of training also is required. So for checking all that, it's very, very important to have a pilot run of some maybe 100 vehicles or so, which would give a lot of insights to all of us.
Yeah,
Which would
Amit,
help in better configuring these trucks.
Yeah.
Sure, Sunil, very quickly.
Very quickly. So thanks, Dr. Rao. I will tell you, we have sold more than 125 trucks already, and they are operating in the field for last 2 years. So we have done a pilot, and anybody who want to have more information, they can connect with us. All the trucks are 55 ton, and they are working in cement industries, they are working on the port, they are working in the steel industry, and many places, right? And the pilot is very successful. Secondly, to answer the anxiety on the battery life and how the trucks will behave, we give 10-year AMC on the truck. So all your questions are answered, except for tire and the bulbs. The AMC will not apply. Otherwise, it will apply on the whole truck. And downtime is very nominal, very close to 3-4 hours or not more than even that. So we have a foolproof solution where trucks are done more than 3 lakh kilometers or 4 lakh kilometers already, and they are working in a very bad condition. Like in cement plants, if you go inside the cement plant, the conditions are very bad for in-house thing, carrying the all concrete thing and everything. So those trucks are working well, and anybody is interested, then we are open for any of you can visit our factory and have more discussion. Thank you.
Sure, Sunil. Yeah, thanks for extending the invitation to visit your factory, and we'll look forward to seeing
Sure.
it in person. Thanks a lot. A few questions which have come. One is on priority sector lending. Yes, let me answer these questions quickly. It is being considered at MHAI to look at electric trucks and electrification in general as a PSL. Second is the question on financing. So there is a conversation at MHAI on financing of electric trucks. If you want to attend, you can please send an email to any of us, and we'll try to connect you to that respective group, and you can participate in the financing conversation. One anonymous question was on CNG. Well, there is definitely a case for greenhouse gas, but what about health benefit that comes from CNG? So, Avril, you want to answer? Have we included the health benefits in our analysis?
Yeah, So our study limits its scope to the carbon emission, GHG emissions, and we have not studied the health benefits or the pollutants.
I mean, when we are talking about CNG, I just want to add a different aspect to this. The government is now pushing setting up of biogas plants all over, and the National Dairy Development Board and others have taken initiative. They are setting up very big scale biogas plants, and the idea is when you are actually using dairy waste, dairy dung for making biogas, you are actually arresting the methane emissions into the atmosphere. That itself actually, methane is very more dangerous per ozone layer GHG emissions compared to CO2, and also the using compressed biogas for running vehicles, which can be extended to heavy duty trucks also, would actually help reducing the import of natural gas what we are having now. And also it would actually, every ton of gas produced will have about 33 tons of liquid solid organic manure, which would be actually additional income for the farmers. So NDDB and Amul actually are working very aggressively on this, and there is a proposal to set up very big biogas plants all over India, especially in rural areas, to give the benefit to the farmers.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Rao. I'll just move quickly forward to some of the other questions that have come up, and then we will request people to respond. One was on LNG. I'm sure we have not considered LNG in this analysis. Is that right, Aviral?
No, LNG was there.
Oh, it was there. Perfect. So I think
LNG
the
was
question
there.
is, what were the emission factors for LNG? And that you will probably reply.
I'll share in the chat.
Okay, you can share in the chat. Thanks a lot. The other was on the possibility of battery swapping in trucks. Is that a possibility?
Yes.
Yes, I think it has been.
Yes, it is 100% possibility is there. Already 2 companies are working on it. We have already developed a solution, and it is possible. And battery swapping time is only 7 minutes,
Sure.
not more than that.
The other question which came out was, is retrofitting possible in old trucks? And is it a viable proposition?
Retrofitting is possible, but it is not done because cost-wise it is not feasible. We have taken approval from ICAT doing a retrofitting truck with our batteries. The approval is given under AIS 123, which is the standard for retrofitting trucks. And we have that approval with us. So we have even sold 2-3 trucks initially, but that is not a very good example. New trucks are very close to the same cost basically. So there is no point going for retrofitting because bodies are designed for life of 10 to 15 years. So running a new battery on an old body is a difficult thing.
And
yeah, also the other issue is once the the truck gets converted to electric powertrain, who is going to take care of the vehicle? That's also an issue.
No, it is engine and everything is removed. It is not.
Yeah, I know. That's why
it is battery electric. So the guy who is developing the truck, like we are selling a retro truck, so guarantee and warranty is ours. Because
yes, that's what I'm saying. So he has to take responsibility.
So nobody else is there because drivetrain is the main part in the truck.
Correct.
For body,
Yes.
nobody is going to give warranty. So
Correct.
the truck is running on a drivetrain. So it's a guarantee and warranty of the person who has changed the drivetrain and the battery part.
Yes.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions for Mr. Sunil, and this is asking for your email ID and some more details.
That you can give.
Share with the audience.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest.
That you can share.
Okay, so this was one, and last few questions. Maybe one is that maybe I'll ask Nikita to kind of respond. One is that, Nikita, from your analysis, is there a kind of heavy-duty vehicle segment trucks in Europe and US? Is there a certain weight category these trucks are coming, or it's coming across all weight categories?
So here it's the early deployment is going to be in those vehicle categories where the use cycle favors battery electrics more, which typically means shorter ranges. So the bus category is the one that's seeing the most success early on in the US and EU.
Thanks, Nikita. This is very useful. And again, some of you are asking data from the presentation. Both the reports are actually published online. So you can read at the report in more detail, and we can share the link in the chat box as well. So both these reports, the net zero report and the life cycle emission report, is available online. And one last question was on the economics of it, which was asked that what about the economics? I think the economic analysis, we have not done this, but that is something that will be coming up shortly. So do keep a look at that. This report was largely meant to look at the CO2 reduction potential, the greenhouse gas potential from various powertrain technologies. Now, so that's one. The second part is the cost of this, and what about the payback period of this. So that we will come up in a separate report. So I think we have taken all the questions. We have also exhausted our time, and both the report links are present in the chat window. So before we close, once again, I'll thank everyone of you for joining this webinar organized by ICCT in partnership with ET-Auto on looking at the greenhouse gas reduction potential from the heavy-duty vehicle segment to meet the net zero target. So thank you, and look forward to our future webinars. We will be driving in more details on some of the questions that came up in today's discussion, but some of the other issues which are surrounding the transport industry. So once again, thank you everyone, and look forward to the engaging conversation in the coming times.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.